The alarm bells echoed through the United Earth Command Center as emergency signals flooded in from across the galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the massive display screen watching red dots multiply, like a disease spreading across the star map. Each dot represented another solar system consumed by something the aliens called the Void Reapers. Ambassador Zekthara of the Galactic Federation clicked her insect-like mandibles nervously as she waited in the conference room. Her compound eyes reflected the harsh lights of the human facility, and her translator device hummed softly at her throat. She had never been comfortable around humans, but today she needed them more than ever, Admiral. Lisa Kane entered the room first, followed by Morrison and Colonel Pete Adams. The three humans looked tired, and Kane had coffee, stains on her uniform jacket. They had been dealing with crisis. Reports for 18 hours straight, and it showed in their faces. Zekthara stood as they entered, and her 6 legs moved in what humans had learned was a respectful greeting among her species. Commander Morrison, I come before you today with a request that my people never thought they would make. Morrison sat down heavily in his chair and gestured for the alien to continue. He had dealt with the Federation for 5 years now, and their attitude toward humanity had always been the same. Too violent, they said. Too aggressive for proper galactic society, they claimed. Now here they were asking for help. The Void Reapers have consumed 17 star systems in the past standard year. Zekthara continued, her voice shaking through the translator. Our combined fleets cannot match their savagery. They show no mercy and take no prisoners. They consume entire worlds and leave nothing behind but empty space. Kane leaned forward in her chair. How many ships do they have? Intelligence suggests over 10,000 vessels of various sizes. Their technology is different from ours. They seem to operate as a hive mind with no individual consciousness that we can detect. Adams pulled up holographic displays showing the affected systems. The pattern was clear and methodical. The Reapers were moving toward the core systems of the Federation in a slow but unstoppable advance. What exactly are you asking for? Morrison said, getting straight to the point. Zekthara's mandibles clicked faster now, showing her nervousness. We need soldiers, Commander. Warriors who understand true combat. The Federation forces are trained for peacekeeping and defensive operations. We have not fought a real war in over 2 centuries, and you think humans can help because we're violent? Adams said with a slight smile. Your species has a reputation for military effectiveness that is unmatched in known space, the ambassador replied carefully. We need 10,000 of your finest military personnel. We can provide transport ships and supply lines to get them to the war zones. Morrison exchanged glances with Kane and Adams. The request was not unexpected. Earth had been preparing for something like this ever since first contact with the galactic community. Human military doctrine was indeed different from anything the peaceful species of the Federation practiced. Ambassador, you need to understand something important, Morrison said slowly. When you ask for human soldiers, you're not getting what you think you're getting. Zekthara's compound eyes focused on him with confusion. I do not understand. Commander Adams leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. The Federation fights wars like a chess game. Rules of engagement, honor codes, treatment of prisoners according to galactic law. You try to minimize casualties and preserve infrastructure. That is correct, the ambassador replied. Civilized warfare has protocols that must be followed. Kane laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's why you're losing. The Void Reapers don't follow your protocols. They don't care about your rules. They want to eat your entire species, and they won't stop until they do it. Morrison stood and walked to the display screen, showing the advancing enemy positions. You came here because you heard humans are good at fighting. What you don't understand is why we're good at it. The alien waited for him to continue, but Morrison seemed lost in thought as he studied the tactical situation. The Void Reapers were indeed formidable, but their movement patterns showed weaknesses that Federation commanders had missed. Most species develop warfare as an extension of their social structures, Adams explained. Honor duels between individuals become honor battles between armies. Territorial disputes become territorial wars. Everything has rules because that's how societies function. Humans are different, Kane added. When we fight wars, we fight to win. Not to prove a point or defend honor or follow ancient codes. We fight to make the enemy stop existing as a threat. Zekthara's translator made strange sounds as it struggled with some of the human words. I still do not fully comprehend the distinction you are making. Morrison turned back to face her, and his expression was cold as winter ice. "Ambassador, the Federation is asking us to send soldiers to fight in your war. But soldiers follow rules. Soldiers have limits on what they can do. Soldiers try to minimize civilian casualties and preserve enemy infrastructure for post-war reconstruction." "Yes, that is exactly what we need," she replied eagerly. "No," Morrison said firmly, "it isn't. What you need are people who will end this war permanently. You need people who will make sure the Void Reapers never threaten anyone ever again. You need people who don't fight to win battles. You need people who fight to eliminate problems." Adams pulled up new displays showing human military organizational charts. "We have soldiers, Ambassador. Marines and Army infantry and Navy personnel who could fight your conventional war according to your rules. But that's not what will save the galaxy from the Reapers." Kane stood and walked to a secure terminal. She entered her command codes and new files appeared on the display. The classifications were so high that even Zekthara's diplomatic clearance couldn't access the details. "What we have that you need are specialists," Morrison continued. "People who were trained not to fight wars but to end them. People whose job is to find the heart of a problem and cut it out completely." The ambassador's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, and she stared at the humans with something approaching fear. "What kind of specialist?" Morrison's smile was sharp and predatory. "The kind that don't take prisoners. The kind that don't follow rules of engagement. The kind that don't stop until the enemy is completely eliminated. The kind that turn wars into executions. You asked for soldiers to fight the monsters that are consuming your civilization," Adams said quietly. "We're offering you something better. We're offering you the people who specialize in killing monsters." Zekthara stood frozen for long moments as the full implications of what the humans were suggesting sank into her alien mind. The Federation had always feared human military capabilities, but they had never imagined this. "How many of these specialists do you have?" she finally whispered. "Enough," Morrison replied. "The question is whether you really want them unleashed in your galaxy." The elevator descended deep into the Colorado mountains, carrying General Kate Brooks toward a facility that officially did not exist. The numbers on the display kept climbing down past basement levels that most people never knew were there. Level 50, Level 70, Level 100. Finally, the doors opened at Level 123. The pit stretched out before her like an underground city carved from solid rock. Corridors branched off in all directions, leading to training facilities and living quarters and briefing rooms. The air smelled of gun oil and sweat, and something else that Brooks had learned to recognize over her 20-year career. It was the smell of people who had seen too much and done things that regular soldiers never had to do. Brooks walked past the main training area where a woman with short black hair was disassembling a rifle with mechanical precision. Danny Torres looked up as the general passed and nodded respectfully before returning to his weapon maintenance. His file said he had been a cartel hunter in Mexico before his recruitment 5 years ago. 400 confirmed kills against some of the most dangerous criminals on Earth, each one planned and executed with surgical precision. The briefing room was already filling with personnel when Brooks arrived. These were not regular military units, and it showed in how they carried themselves. They moved quietly and watched everything and never seemed to fully relax even in secure areas. Amy Sullivan sat near the back of the room cleaning her fingernails with a small knife. Her background was CIA wet work before she joined the program. Dictators and warlords who threatened regional stability had a habit of disappearing when Sullivan was assigned to their cases. Brooks activated the main display, and images of alien ships filled the screen. The Void Reapers looked exactly like their name suggested, black vessels shaped like massive insects with energy weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. Intelligence reports showed them consuming entire civilizations and leaving nothing behind but empty space. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have all been briefed on the basic situation." Brooks began addressing the assembled team. "The Galactic Federation has requested human military assistance against an enemy that has consumed 17 star systems in the past year." Sergeant Tony Martinez raised his hand. His Delta Force background made him one of the more conventional operators in the room, but even he had skills that went beyond normal Special Forces training. "What exactly are our rules of engagement?" General Brooks smiled, and the expression was not pleasant. "There are no rules of engagement, Sergeant. The only objective is to end the war as quickly and completely as possible." Captain Helen Reed leaned forward in her chair. She had spent 5 years hunting war criminals in the Balkans, and her methods had been effective if not always strictly legal. Are we talking about assassination missions against enemy leadership? We are talking about complete elimination of the threat, Brooks replied. The Federation fights by their rules, which is why they are losing. They engage enemy fleets in space battles. They try to capture territory and hold defensive positions. They follow protocols for prisoner treatment and civilian evacuation. The room was completely silent now as the implications sank in. These people were professionals who understood exactly what the general was describing. The Void Reapers operate as a hive mind. Brooks continued bringing up new intelligence data. Individual ships are controlled by neural cores that coordinate with the central command structure. Cut out the right cores and entire fleets go dark. Find the primary command nodes and you can shut down their entire military capability. Lieutenant Ray Walker spoke up from the front row. His background was Army Rangers, but his specialty was deep infiltration missions behind enemy lines. How do we get close enough to their command ships, General? That is where human advantages become apparent, Brooks replied, switching to technical specifications. Federation ships are large and obvious because they fight honorable engagements at long range. Human stealth technology allows us to get boarding parties directly onto enemy vessels. Amy Sullivan stopped playing with her knife and looked up with interest. Boarding actions against hive mind species. That sounds personal. Very personal, Brooks confirmed. Once you are inside their ships, you locate the neural command centers and eliminate them by any means necessary. No prisoners, no negotiations, no mercy. The display changed to show interior layouts of captured Reaper vessels. The corridors were narrow and dark with organic-looking walls that seemed to pulse with alien life. It was the kind of environment that would terrify regular soldiers, but these people looked at it like a workplace. What about Federation oversight? Asked Captain Reed. Are they going to want reports on our activities? Brooks laughed and the sound echoed off the concrete walls. The Federation specifically requested that we handle this situation without their direct involvement. They want results, but they do not want to know the details. Sergeant Martinez nodded slowly. Plausible deniability. They get their problem solved and they can claim ignorance about our methods exactly, Brooks confirmed. As far as the galaxy is concerned, this will be a conventional military operation. Human forces will engage Reaper fleets and eliminate the threat through superior tactics and technology. Danny Torres finally looked up from his rifle maintenance. What they do not know is that we are not fighting battles. We are conducting executions. That is correct, Brooks said. The Federation asked for soldiers to fight their war. Command has decided to send specialists who will end the war instead. The room filled with quiet conversations as team leaders discussed logistics and mission parameters with their people. These were professionals who had dealt with impossible situations before. Terrorist cells that seemed untouchable, criminal organizations with government protection, enemy agents who disappeared into civilian populations. Your transport ships will be ready within 72 hours, Brooks announced. You will be operating in small teams with complete autonomy once you reach the operational area. Command will provide intelligence updates and supply coordination, but tactical decisions are entirely yours to make. Amy Sullivan raised her hand. What happens after we eliminate the Reaper threat, General? Brooks paused before answering because this was the question she had been dreading. That depends on how the galaxy reacts to our methods. The Federation thinks they are hiring soldiers. They are actually hiring executioners. Once they see what we are capable of, they may decide they made a mistake. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. These people had been down this road before. Governments and organizations called them when conventional approaches failed. But once the immediate threat was eliminated, those same governments often decided that the cure was worse than the disease. If that happens, Brooks continued, then we will deal with that situation the same way we deal with all threats to human interests. Quickly and permanently. The briefing ended and personnel began filing out toward their preparations. In 72 hours, they would be in space heading toward an alien war zone. The galaxy thought it was getting human soldiers to help fight the monsters. Instead, it was getting the people who specialized in becoming bigger monsters than anything else in the darkness. The UES Death's Head dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, like a shadow materializing from nothing. The ship was barely 300 meters long compared to the massive Federation dreadnoughts that measured over 2 kilometers. But where Federation vessels were built for honor and intimidation, The human ship was designed for one purpose only: to deliver death without being detected. Major Carlos Vega stood on the bridge studying the tactical display that showed the enemy positions. 17 Void Reaper hive ships hung in formation around the dying planet below. Each vessel was the size of a small city and carried enough firepower to reduce continents to ash. Intelligence reports said there were over 10,000 Reapers aboard each ship, operating as parts of a single deadly mind. Captain Beth Anderson checked her equipment one final time in the boarding pod bay. The Federation had tried conventional attacks against these ships for months with no success. Their massive fleets would engage the Reapers in honorable combat at long range, exchanging energy blasts until one side retreated or was destroyed. It was warfare as the galaxy understood it, but it was also why they were losing. The human approach was different. Instead of fighting ship to ship, they would go inside the enemy vessels and cut out the neural cores that controlled entire fleets. It was not warfare in any civilized sense. It was surgery performed with explosives and bullets. Lieutenant Ray Walker moved through the final equipment check with his team. Each boarding pod carried 12 humans armed with weapons designed specifically for close-quarters combat inside alien vessels. No heavy armor that would slow them down, no energy weapons that might be detected by enemy sensors, just human reflexes and human weapons, and human determination to end this war permanently. The first boarding pod launched silently from the depths, head moving toward the largest Reaper vessel on a trajectory that avoided all sensor sweeps. Inside the cramped space, Walker and his team prepared for what Federation strategists said was impossible. They were going to board a ship that housed 10,000 enemies and survive long enough to complete their mission. Amy Sullivan checked her specialized charges one more time. The neural cores were biological computers that required precise destruction to shut down without alerting the rest of the hive mind. Too much explosive force and the dying core would send a warning signal. Too little and the core would regenerate within hours. The margins for error were measured in grams of explosive material. The boarding pod made contact with the Reaper hull and immediately began cutting through the alien metal with focused plasma torches. The process took 90 seconds, and then Walker was leading his team into corridors that looked more like the inside of a living creature than a spacecraft. The walls pulsed with organic rhythms and the air smelled of things that had never existed on any human world. Danny Torres moved through the alien passages like death itself. Where Federation soldiers would have announced their presence and demanded surrender, he simply eliminated everything that stood between him and his objective. The Reapers were individually powerful, but they had never faced enemies who struck from the shadows without warning or mercy. The first Reaper patrol died before they knew humans were aboard their ship. Torres put 3 bullets into each alien center mass and moved on without checking if they were dead. There was no time for caution and no room for mistakes. Every second they remained aboard increased the chances of discovery. Sergeant Tony Martinez led his team toward the secondary neural cluster, while Walker's group headed for the primary command center. The ship was a maze of organic corridors and chambers that seemed designed by something that had never heard of human architecture. But the intelligence briefings had been accurate, and Martinez found his target exactly where the report said it would. The neural core was a massive, brain-like structure suspended in fluid and connected to thousands of fiber optic cables that carried signals throughout the ship. It pulsed with alien thoughts, and Martinez could hear a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate inside his skull. He placed the charges exactly as Amy Sullivan had instructed and activated the timer. 3 levels above, Walker reached the primary command center and found something that made even his experienced nerves tighten. The chamber was filled with hundreds of Reaper larvae floating in growth tanks connected to the main neural network. This was not just a warship. It was a breeding facility that could produce thousands of new enemies every month. Walker placed his charges and moved toward the extraction point. The mission parameters were clear: destroy the neural cores and escape before the ship realized what had happened. But seeing the breeding operation changed everything. This ship could not be allowed to continue existing in any form. Amy Sullivan's voice crackled over the communication system from her position near the engineering section. Primary charges placed and ready for detonation. 2 minutes to neural core destruction. The first explosion came exactly on schedule and the effect was immediate. Emergency lights began flashing throughout the ship, and the constant humming sound of the neural network changed pitch and rhythm. The hive mind was starting to realize that something was wrong, but it was already too late. Walker activated the secondary charges he had placed in the breeding facility and felt the deck shudder beneath his feet. The ship's biological systems were shutting down as the neural cores died and took the controlling intelligence with them. What had been a coordinated war machine was becoming a drifting hulk filled with confused individual aliens. The extraction, pods launched from multiple points on the Reaper vessel, carrying human teams, back to the Death's Head. Behind them, the hive ship went dark as its main power systems failed. On the tactical display, 16 more enemy vessels suddenly stopped moving in formation as their command ship lost the ability to coordinate fleet operations. Major, Vega watched the enemy formation collapse into chaos and confusion. What should have required a massive fleet engagement lasting hours had been accomplished by 48 humans in less than 20 minutes. The largest Reaper vessel was drifting dead in space, and the remaining ships were operating without central coordination. Captain Anderson prepared the second wave of boarding pods. With the command ship eliminated, the remaining vessels would be easy targets. Each neural core that died would take dozens of ships offline as the hive mind structure collapsed. By the end of the day, there would be nothing left of the Reaper presence in this system except empty hulks drifting in space. The Federation had been fighting these enemies for over a year with conventional tactics and achieved nothing except a slow retreat toward their core systems. Human specialists had ended the threat in a single day by ignoring every rule of civilized warfare and focusing entirely on killing the enemy as efficiently as possible. The galaxy was about to learn that humans did not fight wars. They ended them. Admiral Cawthron stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, with forearms spread wide in a gesture of complete bewilderment. His blue skin had turned pale and his usually confident voice shook as he delivered the report that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity. Forever, honored council members, the human forces have achieved what our combined fleets could not accomplish in over a year of warfare. He began his words carefully chosen to avoid panic among the assembled representatives. The Void Reaper threat has been eliminated from 17 star systems in just 3 months. Counselor Yathara leaned forward from her position at the central podium. Her serpentine body coiled with nervous energy as she processed what the Admiral was telling them. Surely you mean the Reapers have been driven back or contained, Admiral. Complete elimination seems impossible given their numbers. No, Counselor. I mean complete elimination. No survivors. No retreating forces. No prisoners taken for interrogation. The human method appears to be total extermination of enemy forces in every engagement. The council chamber filled with nervous chittering and clicking sounds as representatives from dozens of species tried to understand what they were hearing. The Federation had been fighting a defensive war for months, assuming that eventual victory would come through superior numbers and better technology. The idea that the enemy could simply be eliminated had never occurred to them. Ambassador Zekthera shifted uncomfortably in her designated area. She had been the one to approach Earth for help, and now she was beginning to understand the true implications of that decision. The humans had not sent soldiers to help fight their war. They had sent something far more dangerous. Admiral Cawthron activated the holographic display showing star system after star system, marked in green instead of the red that had dominated their maps for so long. Human forces operate in small teams aboard vessels that our sensors can barely detect. They do not engage in fleet battles or attempt to capture territory. Instead, they board enemy ships and eliminate command structures directly. What do you mean by eliminate? Asked Counselor Veltar from the Military Oversight Committee. The Admiral paused before answering because the truth was difficult to express in terms that civilized species would understand. They locate the neural cores that control Reaper hive ships and destroy them completely. When the controlling intelligence dies, the entire fleet becomes inoperative. It is surgical precision applied to warfare in ways we have never seen. And the individual Reapers aboard these ships, pressed Veltar, also eliminated. The humans do not take prisoners or attempt to convert captured enemies. They appear to view the Reapers as a problem to be solved rather than an enemy to be defeated. The distinction was lost on many of the council members, but Ambassador Zekthara understood it perfectly. The Federation fought wars to achieve political objectives or defend territory or protect civilians. Humans fought wars to make their enemies stop existing as a threat. The difference was fundamental and terrifying. Meanwhile, on Earth, Commander Jake Morrison received regular reports from his deployed teams across the galaxy. The efficiency numbers were beyond anything military planners had predicted. Staff Sergeant Rick Johnson had infiltrated a Reaper breeding facility on Kepler 438b and eliminated the entire reproductive cycle with a single bioweapon. The facility had been capable of producing 10,000 new warriors every month. Now it was a sterile tomb drifting in space. Lieutenant Kelly Martinez had achieved something even more impressive on the Outer Rim territories. Intelligence had identified 3 separate hive queens operating in the Vega sector. These were not just command units, but the actual reproductive centers for entire Reaper populations. Martinez had eliminated all 3 in a single week, using targeted assassination techniques that left no trace of human involvement. Colonel Pete Adams reviewed the tactical reports with a mixture of professional pride and growing concern. The teams are performing beyond expectations, but we are starting to see political complications, he told Morrison during their daily briefing. Federation Command is asking questions about our methods. Morrison studied the casualty reports from both sides. Human losses were minimal because they avoided direct confrontation whenever possible. Reaper losses were total because humans did not fight battles they intended to survive. Every engagement ended with complete enemy elimination or mission failure and withdrawal. What kind of questions? Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. The usual concerns about prisoner treatment and civilian casualties and rules of engagement. Adams replied, "They want to know why we never capture live Reapers for interrogation, and why our casualty ratios are so different from their previous engagements." The truth was that human forces operated under different assumptions than Federation military doctrine allowed. When Amy Sullivan eliminated a hive queen, she did not worry about capturing intelligence or preserving enemy infrastructure for post-war analysis. Her job was to make sure that particular queen never produced another generation of Reapers. Admiral Lisa Kane joined the briefing with reports from the political side of the operation. "The Federation Council is getting nervous about our success rate," she announced without preliminary greetings. "Apparently some species are starting to ask uncomfortable questions about human military capabilities." Morrison was not surprised by this development. Human military doctrine had always been viewed with suspicion by the galactic community. Too aggressive, they said, too focused on elimination rather than resolution. Now they were seeing the practical results of that approach and discovering that their own methods were inadequate by comparison. "Are they asking us to modify our tactics?" Adams asked. "Not yet, but the pressure is building. Some council members are suggesting that human forces should coordinate more closely with Federation oversight to ensure compliance with galactic warfare conventions." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Galactic warfare conventions are why they were losing the war before we arrived. The Reapers do not follow conventions, and they do not care about civilian casualties or prisoner treatment. Fighting them with conventional methods is like trying to perform surgery with a wooden spoon." The reports continued to pour in from across the galaxy. Danny Torres and his team had eliminated the last Reaper stronghold in the Perseus arm, using methods that would have been considered war crimes if applied against any species capable of surrender. Captain Helen Reed had tracked down and destroyed 3 separate hive ship construction facilities that would have produced hundreds of new vessels within them. Every success made the Federation more nervous and more dependent on human capabilities. They wanted the results, but they did not want to know the details. They wanted their enemy eliminated, but they did not want to think about what elimination actually meant when applied by specialists who had no interest in taking prisoners. The galaxy is about to learn something important about asking humans for help, Morrison said as he reviewed the final reports. "We do not do things halfway, and we do not stop until the job is finished completely." The war against the Void Reapers was almost over, but the real consequences were just beginning to unfold across the galaxy. 6 months after the first human deployment, the galaxy map showed no red markers anywhere in known space. The Void Reaper threat was not contained or diminished or pushed back to distant sectors. It was completely extinct. Every hive ship destroyed, every breeding facility eliminated, every trace of the species that had terrorized the galaxy for over a year, wiped from existence as if they had never been born. Ambassador Zekathara stood once again in the Earth Command conference room, but everything had changed since her desperate plea for help. Her compound eyes no longer showed the panic and fear that had driven her to beg humans for assistance. Instead, they reflected something far more disturbing. The cold realization that her people had unleashed something they could not. Control Commander Jake Morrison sat across from her with the same casual confidence he had always shown. But now that confidence carried implications that made her skin crawl. Behind him, Admiral Lisa Kane and Colonel Pete Adams reviewed data tablets showing deployment reports from across the galaxy. Human forces had not returned to Earth as expected. Instead, they had established permanent positions throughout former Reaper territory. Commander Morrison, I come before you today to express the gratitude of the Galactic Federation for your assistance in our recent crisis. Zekthara began her formal words, carefully rehearsed to avoid giving offense. Your people have achieved what we thought was impossible. You are welcome, Ambassador. Morrison replied, but his tone suggested the conversation was far from over. However, the Galactic Council believes that with the immediate threat eliminated, it would be appropriate for human military forces to return to Earth. The Federation can handle peacekeeping and reconstruction efforts in the affected systems. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Morrison exchanged glances with Kane and Adams before answering, and his smile was sharp as a blade. I am afraid that is not how this works, Ambassador, he said quietly. You came to Earth because you needed people who could eliminate the Reaper threat completely and permanently. We did exactly what you asked us to do. Zekthara felt her mandibles clicking nervously despite her efforts to maintain diplomatic composure. Yes, and we are grateful for your assistance. But surely you understand that the emergency situation no longer exists. Adams leaned forward in his chair, and his expression was polite but inflexible. The emergency situation exists as long as there are potential threats to galactic security. The Reapers were just one problem among many that the Federation has been unable to handle effectively. Kane activated a holographic display that showed current political tensions throughout the galaxy, border disputes between species that had been ignored during the Reaper crisis, pirate organizations that had grown powerful while Federation forces were focused elsewhere, criminal cartels that operated across multiple systems with complete impunity. As you can see, Ambassador, there is still plenty of work to be done, Kane said, gesturing to the display. Human forces are uniquely qualified to handle these security issues. The truth was more complicated than the humans were willing to admit in this formal setting. Danny Torres and his teams had not been idle while waiting for new assignments. They had identified and eliminated several criminal organizations that the Federation had been unable to touch. Amy Sullivan had integrated herself into the political structure of 4 different species, making herself indispensable to their security arrangements. Staff Sergeant Rick Johnson had established training facilities on 3 worlds where human methods were being taught to selected Federation personnel. The curriculum focused on what humans politely called direct action techniques. What it actually taught was how to eliminate problems permanently, rather than managing them through conventional law enforcement. Lieutenant Kelly Martinez had become something, approaching a legend in the Outer Rim systems, where her reputation for solving impossible problems had attracted requests from planetary governments that the Federation could not or would not help. Her methods were brutal and effective and completely outside the legal framework that governed galactic peacekeeping operations. What exactly are you proposing, Commander? Zekthara asked, though she already suspected the answer would be unacceptable to the Council. Morrison stood and walked to the main display showing human positions throughout the galaxy. Red dots marked permanent bases. Blue dots showed patrol routes. Green dots indicated training facilities. The pattern was clear and unmistakable. Humanity had not sent temporary assistance. They had begun a systematic occupation. What we are proposing is very simple, Ambassador. The galaxy asked for protection from threats that conventional forces could not handle. We have provided that protection, and we intend to continue providing it. The Federation did not ask for occupation, Zekthara replied with more heat than diplomatic protocol allowed. No, Adams said calmly. You asked for warriors to save you from monsters. We sent people who specialize in killing monsters. Now those people have decided that the best way to keep you safe is to make sure no new monsters ever threaten galactic security. The implications were staggering, and Zekthara finally understood the full scope of what her desperate request had set in motion. The humans had not come to fight in the Federation's war. They had come to take control of galactic security permanently. Captain Helen Reed had established oversight operations in 17 systems, where human personnel monitored communications and tracked potential threats. Lieutenant Ray Walker commanded rapid response teams that could eliminate developing problems before they became crises. The entire structure was designed to prevent another situation like the Reaper invasion from ever occurring again. You cannot seriously expect the Federation to accept permanent human military presence throughout our territory, Zekthara protested. Morrison's expression hardened, and for the first time she saw the predator that had always existed beneath his professional demeanor. Ambassador, 6 months ago your people were facing extinction. Your combined fleets were retreating on all fronts. Your core systems were preparing for siege. You came to us because everyone else had failed. Kane pulled up casualty reports from the final phase of human operations. We eliminated the threat completely in less time than your previous commanders thought possible. 0 human casualties in the final month of operations. 0 enemy survivors. 0 chance of the threat returning. And now you want us to leave so that you can go back to the same policies and procedures that created the crisis in the first place, Adams added. The same rules of engagement that made your forces ineffective against the Reapers. Zekthara realized that argument was useless. The humans had made their decision, and they possessed the capability to enforce it regardless of Federation approval. The galaxy had learned too late that sometimes the cure was more dangerous than the disease. What do you want from us, she asked in defeat. Morrison's smile returned, but now it carried the weight of absolute authority. Nothing complicated, Ambassador. We want you to be safe. We want the galaxy to remain peaceful. We want to make sure that no threat like the Reapers ever endangers civilized species again. He paused and looked directly into her compound eyes. The question is whether you trust us to do what is necessary to maintain that safety. The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. The galaxy no longer had a choice in the matter. They had asked for soldiers to protect them from monsters. Instead, they had gotten guardians who would never leave.